I'm glad that you joined us, all of those of you who are here, and I hope that the way that Illuminate works is more or less clear to you. What I would like to do, though, is if you all can hear me, you have a number of buttons underneath where our names are, either a green check mark or the clapping hand or the happy face. And if you click on one of them, I'll make sure in that way that that you are with us. Thank you for Miriam. She has done that. And there, Shah also, I'm glad to know that. And Ilan can now hear us as well. Rotem. I trust that the others can as well and just haven't done the clicking. But let me say something like this. One of the problems with a not face-to-face meeting of this sort is that our lecturer doesn't really get lots of feedback. He doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't know whether people are nodding their heads up and down in agreement or scratching their heads in a lack of understanding. For that reason, we'd like you to use the chat, even to say, I understand, I agree, even to get a check mark or a happy face every so often, which lets us know that you are with us, because when you lecture to people whom you can't see, frankly, it's easy to feel that no one is with you. Thank you, Ilan. We have an evening ahead of us about the subject, the relationship between attention and the paths to control. Our lecturer is Professor Abishi Henik. He's from the Center for Neuroscience at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. I've gone over his presentation, simply preparing for this evening, and I have to admit I find it fascinating, even if I don't really understand it that much. But that's why I'm listening this evening as well, because I'll understand better when he explains. So, if you would have questions, underneath our names, there's a hand with a green arrow next to it. If you click on that, I will get a message saying you'd like to ask a question. But you can also, within the chat, which is just underneath there, just write in a question, and Avishai will see it, and I will see it. And we look forward to a pleasant and interesting evening. Paul, thank you for joining us as well. We hope that others will come along as well. And what I will say now is one more thing. I am here as two moderators at the moment. You see Jay Hurwitz, that's me, but OLE moderator is also below there. He's also in the session. And the reason is because even though I'm sitting in the Mofet Institute in Tel Aviv, we've had some computer problems this evening. And so I prefer to have two computers open so that if something actually goes wrong, I will quickly be able to move from one computer to the other. So we look forward to an interesting session. Again, I'm introducing Professor Abishi Henik, who will be speaking about the relationship between attention and the paths to control. And I hope that those people who are joining us now are able to pick up where things sort of leave off, and will know what's happening. So Abishai, I'm going to turn my microphone off, and you're invited to open yours. And we look forward to an interesting and involving evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good evening. What I'm going to do is to try and describe to you what is going on in a psychology lab or in cognitive neuroscience lab studying attention and cognitive control. And I'm going to present several tasks so that at least we can be you can get familiarized with the how experimental psychologists or cognitive neuroscientists think of cognitive control. Okay, let's start. So, okay, too long. In 1986, Lermit presented a paper that he called the environmental dependency syndrome. In the paper, he discussed two patients. that had big lesions in the frontal lobe. Now, I don't know how the neuroanatomy of people is, so I'll try to explain. So this is an axial or horizontal section through the brain. This is the frontal lobe, temporal, and parietal, occipital, where the visual area is. This is one patient, and this is another patient. The lesion is on the left side, and in the way that radiologists usually present CT or MRI scans is by having the left on the right, right on the left. This is from the certain point of view, so this is why, but here, left is here. So they had the two patients, one 51 years old and the other 52 years old, had a lesion on the right frontal side of the brain. And when he described the patients, so this is the paper itself, when he described the patient's behavior, he says that the woman entered his room, and when she saw various articles on the desk, she immediately took a tongue depressor and started checking it. The physicians thought, and later on she takes the blood pressure gauge and checks it. Blood pressure, and she continues with this behavior. And basically what he says is, what happens is that you can see here, so she says, she immediately picked up the blood pressure gauge and very meticulously took my blood pressure. When I asked her later on what she thought, she said that she was satisfied with my state of health. What Lermit says, or his summary of what happened, it was that control was shifted to the environment, an exaggerated dependence on external cues for control of behavior. So usually what happens, you enter a physician's office or a lecturer's office or somewhere else, and you behave according to your goals or according to actually your role in this particular situation. But this patient and the other person also has another description, behaved differently. And it was as if what happened was that the outer world or the various articles that were on the desk had control over their behavior, which is really very weird. So let me point out several things here. First of all, the patient's behavior was controlled by external stimuli, the blood pressure gauge, for example, rather than by patient's internal goals. Second, there was a switch from a patient task behavior to a physician task behavior. And last but not least, the medical equipment set up a framework for a schema or a model of a physician treating a patient. It was as if there was a whole script that the patient followed, in spite of the fact that there was no script in front of her or no one was telling her what to do, and so on. It was pretty clear what needs to be done when she takes on herself the role of the patient, the physician. Sorry. So the plan of my talk. I'm going to start with a very basic task that we use to study control, the Stoop task. I'm going to talk about task conflict, which is relatively new. Then I'm going to talk about another attentional aspect, alertness or arousal. I'm going to move on to emotion and later on to social priming. This is the schema that I mentioned before. And later on, so just describe to you what we plan in the future experiments, and I'm going to summarize. So let's start. First of all, the Stroop task. You have a word in color, and you are asked to name the color and ignore the word. Now, this is easy because in this case, you're supposed to say red. In this case, you're supposed to say green, but there's a word involved, and the word is red. So you probably feel that this is a little bit different than the red before. This is also might be a little bit difficult. This is easy, yellow. This is red. This is very easy because the word and the color indicate the same reaction, and so on. Okay, this is green for blue, red, and so on. So we have several conditions here. One is congruent.
Recording started.
One is congruent, and you can see that we have to say to respond red, and there's the word is red. Another condition is neutral. That is, there's no red to interfere with our response, and there's an incongruent condition, which is the most difficult condition. The word is green, but the response that is required here is red. Stroop, by the way, suggested this task in 1935, so this is a long time ago, and since then people are using it, you'll see. And the Dutch were really very impressed by Stroop, so they called the water after him. This is how it works. We present the various conditions: congruent, neutral, incongruent, and actually all my slides will look similar. So we'll have reaction time in milliseconds here on the y-axis, and the various conditions on the x-axis. Reaction time in this particular case is measured from the appearance of the word or the stimulus until the onset of the response. Response can be a vocal response, like saying red, or it can be indicated by key press. So you can see that in this case we have an incongruent, and the incongruent is longer. The reaction time is longer to incongruent than to neutral. The difference between these two is called interference, because elongation of reaction time here compared with the neutral is indicative of interference of the irrelevant word. The difference between the neutral and the congruent, this difference is termed facilitation. Usually this is the case. There's a large interference and small facilitation. And this is how the Stroop is measured. Now, 2 points that are worth mentioning. One is that we rarely make mistakes. That is, we usually do not read the word. We are asked to pay attention to the color, so we report the color and ignore the word. However, it is a little bit harder, and the reaction time is longer in the incongruent. And this happens almost always. Another point is that in order to generate the effect, or in order to get the effect, a participant needs to be familiar with the language. For example, if someone in the audience here is not familiar with English, there is not going to be a superfluous. The word is not going to interfere. So there's a need for some proficiency in the language in order to get the effect. Now, in a sense, the fact that we can ignore the word is indicative of the ability to control the outside or the stimulus, because in some sense the word calls or is automatically activates the need or the tendency to read it. And I'll show you in a minute what this means. But several years ago, we tried to manipulate control, and what we did was to change the proportion of neutral files. That is, the congruent and the incongruent stayed exactly the same. There was no change in the proportion of congruent and incongruent, but there was a change in the proportion of neutrals. The idea was that if you have lots of neutrals, you're going to adopt some kind of a lenient strategy, and not feel that you don't need to control reading all the time, and you may get a relatively large superfit. And what happens here was that this is the 25% neutral, and in the 25% neutral, we get a stupefect. The incongruent is slower than the neutral, and there's a little facilitation also. In the 75% neutrals, so just remember that the proportion of congruent and incongruent stay the same. There's an enlarged interference. So the interference here is much larger than the interference here, and we thought that this is a way to manipulate control, which is a way to really look at this aspect, but we're going to hear more about it. Now, the major brain areas involved in this interference, facilitation, stupefect, or cognitive control in general, actually, because they are involved in other tasks. Also, are the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, and you can see it here. This is a medial view of the cortex. The eyes will be here, roughly. So this is the medial view of the cortex. You can see another picture here. And this is the anterior cingulate cortex. So this is one area involved. The other area involved is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and you can see it over here. So this is a side view of the cortex. This is a medial view in the middle. And this is a side view, a lateral view of the cortex. And this is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. These two areas are involved. In recent years, people suggested that the anterior cingulate monitors conflict, or kind of find out if there is a conflict, and communicate with the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which helps resolve the conflict by, for example, inhibiting the irrelevant material. In this particular case of the stroke, irrelevant word. Now, usually ACC, anterior cingulate activation, in the incongruent is larger than neutral files. ACC signals a conflict situation, as I said before. Accordingly, you would expect a smaller activation for the congruent than for the neutral. because the congruent is less conflict, need to be less activated than the neutral. However, there are several studies that reported larger activation in the congruent than in the neutral trials. These are the studies. So we have some kind of a paradox here. In the behavior, there is a facilitation. Congruent trials are responded to faster than neutral trials. In the ACC, in the functional MRI studies, there is a reverse facilitation. Congruent gives larger activation in the anterior cingulate than neutral. So we have a paradox. We suggested that actually what's going on is that there are two conflicts rather than one. One conflict is whether we should respond to the in this particular case, respond red or blue. This is what we call the information conflict. And information conflict appears clearly in the incongruent trials. It doesn't appear in the congruent trials. There's another conflict. We call it the task conflict. And in this particular case, the question is, should I read the word or name the color? Now, if you think about it for a minute, task conflict appears also in the congruent condition, because in the congruent condition there is a color and a word. Now, there's no information conflict, but there is a task conflict. And this is what drives the activation in the anterior cingulate. Now, in order to see if we can show this conflict, or if we can reveal this conflict behaviorally, in behavior, not in functional MRI, we ran the following experiment. We used 75% neutrals. If you remember from our previous experiment, this generated kind of a lenient attitude, so hopefully it will be the same here. And also 50% cueing. The cueing went like this. If there is an X, it means that it is going to be the upcoming stimulus is going to be a color word. If it's an O, the upcoming stimulus is going to be a letter series, neutral. In the X, you don't know if it's going to be a congruent or incongruent. With the O, you know that it's going to be a neutral. Question mark, this is the other half of the trials. Question mark means any stimulus, we don't have any information. So there's a Q and then a target. In the Q trials, that is, the V is 50%, there's a interference and some reverse facilitation, but it wasn't significant statistically. In the non-Q trials, you get a large interference, but also the reverse facilitation. This is very similar to what happens in functional MRI, in the neuroimaging studies. That is, we get a reverse facilitation, which we think is indicative of the task conflict in the congruent. As I said before, usually you get the congruent is faster than the neutral. And this is because the task conflict apparently is something that we learn to deal with very fast. So, to summarize, we have a reverse facilitation, congruent slower than neutral, if we created conditions in which, as my student who ran the study used to say, we put the guard, the control to sleep. That's the basic idea. Now, it turned out that others found similar results. One is an excellent example comes from Vidu Lahey lab in Leiden, the Netherlands. And here, what Guido and his group did was to use a object naming task. So you're presented with an object in color, and you are asked to name the color and ignore the object. And basically, you get an object competition, and the object competition, that is slower reaction times to this condition than to this condition, because this has an object, this is a non-object, kind of like our neutral in the stoop. But this object competition, which is similar to our task conflict, appears only in children, not in adults. So when your control system improves, you don't get this object competition. Now, here's another control task. You are in a car, in a stoplight, and you are about to start moving. Sorry, you are about to start moving forward. You want to step on the accelerator, but something happens. A bicycle appears in front of your car, and you need to stop. This stopping process, stopping a process or a response that was just initiated, is not a simple matter. And needless to say, we need control. In this case, we talk about control of a pre-potent response. This was turned into a lab task by Gordon Logan, and it is called these days the stop signal task, or stop signal paradigm, and it goes like this. Now, what Gordon Logan wanted, before I present the task, what Gordon Logan wanted to do was to find out a way to measure the ability to stop. Now, this is not a simple thing, because basically you are asking people to respond, and you try to measure their ability to stop, and their ability to stop means that they are not going to respond. How do you measure that? So the task goes like this. You are presented with a red or a green stimulus, and you're asked to decide to respond with one hand or one finger to the red and one finger to the right for green. Sometimes, right after the stimulus appears, you are presented with a tone. If the tone appears, you are asked not to respond. Now, it is pretty easy not to respond if the tone appears simultaneously with the onset of the imperative stimulus. Then it's not difficult at all. If it appears 50 milliseconds after the onset of the stimulus, it is also not very difficult. But as it appears later and later on after the stimulus, as it is delayed relative to the onset of the stimulus, it becomes harder to stop. And at a certain point, you're not going to stop. You're going to produce a response in spite of the tone. So, in the task itself,
Abishai?
Yes?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
My question is very simple. Is this in a real-life situation where I'm in danger of actually hitting the bicyclist because I'm starting to drive, or is this a controlled situation?
No. It's what I'm describing as a case in which you take this situation to the lab and try to learn how people behave in this case and what might affect their behavior.
Meaning I'm not in danger of killing somebody because I don't know how to stop on time.
No.
Okay, fine.
The first one was just an example.
Okay.
Now we move to the lab. No, we're not killing anyone. Okay? Any other
I'm
questions?
relieved. That's okay.
Okay. So, what happens in the experiment itself is that you are presented with stimuli, and on 30% of the trials, or 25% of the trials, you are presented with a tone, and you have to stop. Now, and we measure stopping, how long it takes to stop. I can describe the procedure. In general, what you do is you start, say, with the tone stop signal presented 200 milliseconds after the imperative stimulus. If the person was able to stop, you elongate this interval to, say, 220 milliseconds. If the next trial he was able to stop, you elongate it again until he is not able to stop, in which case you reduce the interval to 220 milliseconds and then 200 milliseconds. So you play with it until you get to the point where the person was able to stop only on 50% of the trials. This kind of experiment in which people sometimes are able to stop, sometimes they are not, get you a very large number of trials in which people did not stop. This is, of course, a mistake on their part. And we wanted to use these errors, the not stopping, in cases in which they had to stop, to measure task conflict. But before I describe the experiment, let me just say that the area, the brain area mostly involved in stopping is the right frontal gyrus, inferior frontal gyrus. Not only this area, but this is the major area involved in this task. So now, our experiment. So we thought that basically if you didn't stop when you were supposed to stop, there's a failure of control, which we thought was similar to failure of controlling task conflict. So we just ran a study in which there was a stoop stimulus and a stop signal from time to time, 30% of the time. So the experiment goes like this. You have a stoop stimulus, and you're supposed to say green here, red here, red here, red, and so on. And sometimes there's a stop signal. And when there's a stop signal, you're supposed to stop. What happens in the actual experiment? This is the Stroop results. So in the incongruent, you get responses. This is the non-stop trials, meaning these trials that you weren't supposed to stop, regular Stroop trials. And you get a interference plus little facilitation. And then the trials in which there's stop trials, but people did respond, so you can measure reaction time. In this case, you get an interference and also a reverse facilitation, as I said before, indicative of the task conflict. We then did another experiment with, I think, short of time, so I'm going to skip this and summarize at this point that control involves proactive, advanced, and reactive stimulus-dependent components. So it's not only something that I can prepare to, but it's something that happens on a trial-by-trial basis. When proactive control fails or is relaxed by experimental manipulation, task conflict or the reverse facilitation may be revealed. The latter occurs even when information conflict doesn't exist. I didn't show you this experiment. Task conflict and information conflict mediate the STU performance, and we suggest that both conflicts activate the anterior cingulate. Okay. It is possible that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved mainly in proactive control, whereas the right IFG, right inferior frontal gyrus, is involved in reactive control. So now let's move to alertness. A signal that precedes a target stimulus commonly raises alertness or arousal. The brain systems involved here that we think of is the locus coeruleus or norepinephrine system. So basically it's a structure here in the brainstem which, by the way, irrigates almost the whole brain. This is a good example for lower subcortical structure modulating processing of cortical structure. Let me just say a word here about what I said before. So in the STUP stimulus, we were talking mainly about cortical structures. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, inferior frontal gyrus, and the anterior cingulate. Everything was high in the brain, or higher structures. And basically we were talking about top-down modulation of various processes. Here, we are talking, when we talk about alertness, we talk about bottom-up processes, or subcortical structures that modulate processing in the higher cortical brain areas. Let's continue. So here's a test that implements several aspects of attention. And I'm going to talk about alertness that I just talked about a minute ago. I'm going to talk about executive control, or the STUP task, or selective attention, and I'm going to talk about orienting of attention, another aspect of attention that I didn't mention before. So you're presented with a series of arrows, and you're asked to respond to the middle one and ignore the flanking arrows. So we have 5 arrows here, a middle one that is going to point either to the right or to the left. Your response is supposed to be right, click with your right hand if it points to the right, click with the left hand if it points to the left, and ignore the flanking arrows. This is called the flanker task. In this case, we have a congruent condition because the flanking arrows and the target arrow, the middle one, point in the same direction. This would be an incongruent condition, right? Because the middle one points to middle arrow, the target points to the left, whereas the flanking arrows point to the right. Now, just before this stimulus appears, there's a cue. The cue can appear above the fixation point or below the fixation point. If it appears above the fixation point, this trial will be a valid trial. That is, the cue kind of predicts where the target stimulus is going to appear. If it appears, if the the cue appears above this, the fixation point and the stimulus appears below the fixation point, then we have an invalid trial. And of course, the invalid or valid trial can be congruent, as in this case, or incongruent, as in this case. And last, we can have an alerting signal. So the whole series of events in a given trial is going like this. You have a fixation point, then sometimes you have a tone for 50 milliseconds, an alerting cue, then there's an interval, blank interval, and then a cue that appears above or below the fixation point, a blank interval, and the imperative stimulus. So the alerting cue helps us measure alertness, arousal. This cue helps us measure orienting of attention, shift of attention to this point or below. And the flanker task, very similar to the stoop task, this is how people think about it, help us measure selective attention or cognitive control. When you run this task, brain areas involved, there are several brain areas involved: right superior temporal gyrus, left parietal, and of course frontal areas. There are also subcortical areas involved, as I mentioned before, right thalamus, superior colliculus, and so on. I'm not going to go into other details of the anatomy. Now, usually, when you run this task, and you run, say, now in this case, only the tone, the alerting stimulus, and the cognitive control task, or the selective attention task, in this case, the flanker task, you get a interaction. In this case, when there's an alerting signal, there's a larger congruency effect. This is the incongruent. This is the congruent. Incongruent. Congruent. The difference between these two, which is kind of indicative of a selective attention failure or lack of control or reduced control, cognitive control, appears when there's an alerting stimulus, and the effect is smaller when there's no alert. There's a whole debate in the literature on what exactly caused this interaction, and what I'd like to say is that people thought that it might be the case that an alerting stimulus shut down control. We show that actually this is not the case, because if this was the case, then we had to, one would expect to get the same interaction not only with flanker task but also with stoop task and other tasks like this. But when you run a stoop task, like here, you can see that the interaction goes away. That is the effect in the stoop task, the difference between congruent and incongruent. The congruency effect, or the stoop effect here, is similar when there is an alerting signal and when there is no alerting signal. So what is going on here? We think that actually the alerting signal affects the right hemisphere, which has the tendency for global processing, and because of this broadening of attention, attention encompasses not only the target but also the flanking distractors. And so when you have an alerting signal, you get a larger flanking effect than when you don't have an alerting signal. And this doesn't happen with the stoop stimulus, because the stoop stimulus, there's no distractor that are flanking the imperative stimulus. Let me just stop for a minute if there's any question here. or something that need to be explained in more details?
If there are questions, people are invited to write them either within the chat or to raise their hand, and we can give them a microphone word to ask them. This is a good opportunity.
If not, then I'll just continue, but I think that I will skip a couple of slides because some time constraint, then go, okay? So, let me just describe this experiment, which would be kind of interesting. So, here's an experiment that was conducted by in Cambridge by Chamberlain and others. Was published in 2009. They were looking. They studied the effect of atomoxetine, which is a selective noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor. Basically, this medicine is a new medicine suggested for ADHD, and it turns out that this particular medicine helps in several aspects. The most interesting thing here was that this medicine, or the atomoxetine, helped change stopping. That is, it helped improve stopping. If you remember the stop signal task that I mentioned before, this is one thing. The second thing is that it had an effect. This is an fMRI result, and you can see, okay, so just let me explain. The eyes would be here. This is the frontal lobe. This is the back of the brain, cerebellum here, and this is the right inferior frontal gyrus. And this is the area that was activated when people took atomoxetine. Moreover, atomoxetine, in addition to making this area more activated, also helped stopping. So one way to think about it is that actually what affects, one thing that created this effect was the locus coeruleus, which is the area of the brain that we mentioned in relation to norepinephrine. This is the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system, which made us think that if we use an alerting cue that works on the same system, we might be able to improve stopping. Now, think about it for a minute. This is not a simple thing, because when people have red, green stimuli, and they are told that sometimes they will have to stop, they usually slow down. Because if you have to stop sometimes, you slow down, it will make you, will improve your performance. So we predict in this case that if we have a stop signal after an alerting cue, which actually makes performance faster, this will help stopping. Kind of counterintuitive, I think. But we ran the study. So it goes like this. You have a fixation point. Then sometimes you get an alerting cue. In this case, because we used the tone for stopping, we used the visual alerting cue for 50 milliseconds on 30% of the files. And then sometimes there was a stop signal. The results. Okay? So on the go trials, that is, when there was no stop, alertness improved performance. So this is reaction time, alertness, no alert, and as you would expect, there's improvement in performance. The SSRT, this is the stopping time. I didn't tell you how exactly this is measured, but this is the time that it takes in order to stop, that people need in order to stop, and the shorter it is, the better people are in stopping. And as you can see, that for the SSRT, alertness improved SSRT. Alert compared with no alert. So it looks as if there's an effect on the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system, and this is the effect of alertness. We think that alertness modulates cognitive control. It can be achieved, this modulation can be achieved by facilitation of stopping and incipient response. This is via the right IFG, as I showed you before. But an alerting cue may trigger the LCNE system or cortical global system, and in the latter case, activating the cortical global system, this may come with a cost. That is, you actually process the distractors and when you shouldn't. So this is another example. Emotion, I don't think that we have time. Actually, sorry. So, okay, just a word on this. Emotion is considered usually to be controlled by lower systems and have some kind of a privileged access to cortical system, considered to be very, very automatic. And we showed, I'm not going to go into details, that actually there's top-down down modulation of emotion. And you'll have to believe me that we showed it. And I'd like to just go to social planning, and then maybe, if we have time, just 2 more slides. So, social planning. This is related to schema. So, let's say that we ran a stoop task. And there's one block of stoop task, and as you can see, there's incongruent is longer than congruent. Second block, again, incongruent, longer than congruent. Now, we try to induce some kind of a schema. The way we did it was to present people with what we call a dyslexia priming. What we did was to present them with the following description. Danny is 27 years old, suffers from very severe dyslexia. He cannot read or write, and so on. This is, of course, an exaggerated description. It can be said that Danny is almost analphabetic. Now we ask them for 5 minutes to write down how Danny's everyday life looks like. And we describe this as some kind of a separate, completely irrelevant experiment. Next, after writing this, we give them 2 more blocks of stoop files. The first one and the second one, and as you can see, the stoop effect in the first one reduced dramatically, which fits the description of someone who has difficulties in reading. In comparison, the stoop effect in the second block is very similar to the one that appeared, the effect that appeared before the dyslexia priming. So this is a very short-lived effect, but still it was significant. We tried it with another group of people, with elderly individuals, different tasks, but basically we replicated the effect. Not exactly the same effect, but the general idea. So again, it seems like a very automatic access to the schema or the some kind of a plan that people without having to really think or plan can adopt and behave accordingly. Now, I wanted to just show you one video and say a couple of words, and then we will stop. So, Jay, can you present the video?
Yes, I'm going to do that now. Everyone is now going to essentially have a screen with a YouTube screen showing up on it, and the video is ready in front of you to just click on, and you'll be able to see it by yourselves. You can listen to it, and Avishai may actually speak with us at the same time as we watch it. So if you'll click
While
on
some
start
use
in the
vicious
middle of
weapons
the
to
screen,
dispatch
it shows
prey,
up by you.
others employ the finesse of a marksman.
Then you should be able to see the film. Good luck to you all, and in about 2 minutes we'll see everyone back here.
The archer fish uses a water pistol. It makes a gun barrel by pressing its tongue against a groove in its mouth. It closes its gills to force out the water. It's accurate up to 2 meters. This expert in ballistics even allows for the curving of the jet through gravity. And adjusts for the way light bends at the boundary between water and air, which appears to shift the position of its target. By some amazing computation, it changes its firing angle to compensate for this optical illusion. Archers target anything that moves or glows.
My video is stopped.
Okay.
I don't know if others have finished seeing it as well, but I hope that the tongue of that fish that wasn't hurt by that cigarette.
So can we continue?
Yes, you can continue now. Most people have come back now, and they're telling us that they're back. We'll be happy to see if people will give a check. The green check will know that they've seen the video. Very good. Okay. And they've closed their window, and you're able to now continue.
Okay, so what is the story? What do we want to do with this archerfish? So the archerfish, we have a lab of archerfish at Ben Gurion University, not in my lab, but in the biology department. And as you can see, the archerfish can shoot a target. So basically, we can present something on the screen and train the archerfish to shoot at a target. Now, why is this so interesting? Because when we think of cognitive control, almost many things that I told you about was that it is achieved, and when you read the literature, you can principle itself that people are talking about mostly about frontal lobes or cortical structures. The outer fish is evolutionary older and very low animal. It doesn't have a cortex. It has a maximum attack tooth. We wanted to know if the outer fish can show a stroop effect. Now, of course, we're not going to teach the fish to read words, but we know that the outer fish like colors, and especially we thought at the time that it likes red. So imagine that you do the following thing. You present the fish with two squares and train it to shoot at the larger one. In this case, this one. In this case, this one. One of the squares can be colored red, the other one white. So if the fish likes red, this would be a congruent trial because the bigger one is also red. This is an incongruent trial because the fish likes red, but it needs to shoot at the larger square. And this last one will be neutral. We ran so far 3 fish on this, and the results should be here. Yes. This is the result. So you have reaction time. As you can see, it's slower. I'll explain in a minute. This is the incongruent, this is the neutral, and this is the congruent. And as you can see, there is a stroop effect. Now, why is it so slow? Because what happens is that the fish, the two squares appear on the screen. The fish shoots at the screen, and we look or analyze the data offline. That is, we take pictures, video of the whole experiment, and then we look at it online. And reaction time, as I explained before, is measured from the onset of the stimuli, of the two squares, to the beginning of shooting by the fish. And you can see the result. Now, this work with the archer fish suggests that lower, evolutionary older brain structures are endowed with routines that enable inhibitory control. We think that through evolution, the more primitive routines became accessible to other cognitive processes and brain structures, and help develop the evolutionary newer control system. How exactly this happened is still to be studied, but this is one way to think of it. Now, to summarize up to this point, cognitive control aims to enable an organism to pursue its goals. It involves orchestration of inhibitory as well as facilitatory processes. Note that quite a bit of work, even basic inhibitory processes, with the output too, can be handled by hardwired local circuits. Prefrontal cortex seems to be centrally involved in control. This is related to its, we think, rich connections with cortical as well as subcortical structures, and the ability to flexibly handle varied information and actions. These are two actually theories suggested regarding why and how the frontal lobe are so heavily involved in control. Now, I just want to say one word before we end. I didn't mean the outer fish is not meant to suggest that control can be handled by lower brain structures, and we don't need the cortex or something like this, or that what we see in the fish is similar to what we see in humans. No, not at all. What I'm saying is that it is important and, in my opinion, very interesting to see that there are very basic routines that look like our inhibitory control that already appear in very lower animals. And it would be very interesting to find out whether this lower level control is really the precursor of what we have or what higher animals have or developed to evolution. That's basically it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Abishai. I admit I didn't know what to expect when I started reading your, going through what I saw here. And I want to thank you very much because I think I now really do understand that I have lots of questions. I won't get into them all, but I did ask a question here in the chat, which I would like to ask. You ran a similar Stroop experiment on a lower being. I don't want to call computers higher beings, but my question would be, could we confuse a computer in a Stroop experiment?
Say again?
Could we confuse a computer if we ran a Stroop experiment on it, that it had to choose between two things? And notice that Nina has also asked a question here, but we'll ask that after we hear you. Yes.
Okay. So first, I didn't describe it, but there are quite a few computer modeling of Stroop. This is a very frequently used task. So there are several computer models that try to look at it, and of course, when they run the model in the computer has to act like a participant, and you get responses, and you can find out whether the model works. Our task conflict that I referred to at the beginning of the talk is something new that common models don't have. So we are working now on changing existing models in order to cope with this task conflict, and it seems that we need to add some modules to the existing models. But this is a different story. I mean, it will take time to explain, but basically the long answer to your short question was yes.
Okay, thank you. Nina has asked a more education-oriented question. She asks... Go ahead.
Based on the research, right? I'm reading the right thing? Based on the research,
yes.
What recommendation would you have for teachers in dealing with attention issues in the classroom? Okay, this is a very general question, and I'm not sure that I have a very specific recommendation. So first of all, it depends. It depends on whether we are talking about kids with attention deficits or attention problems. This is one group of kids, ADHD and so on. The other thing that another group, and this is the larger group of kids, is that in many cases in the classroom we have children that have to do a task, but at the same time they have to ignore irrelevant information. The Stroop is a very simple example, or the flanker is a very simple example, but this happens for many kids, in many kids, when you do arithmetic. You have to pay attention to certain things and ignore other things. I think that the general recommendation that I would have is to try and pay attention to this attentional aspects and see when, for example, a distractor kicks in and modulate the students' work, and see if we can direct them to the right, when it's a tensional problem and when it is a domain-specific problem. That is, a student may have difficulties in arithmetic because they have specific, domain-specific problems with arithmetic because they find it difficult, or because they have attentional problems that prevent them, to put it simply, from paying attention to the right thing. And this is not talking about students that suffer from ADHD, just students in the class. So I would suggest that this is something that we have to pay attention to. With respect to ADHD, different group of children or adults, actually, it turns out that it seems that recent literature on ADHD suggests that people who suffer from ADHD may have an executive problem or selective attention problem, which suggests that we need to deal with this. And one possibility, for example, if alertness, for example, can help with that, then maybe we can use alerting cues in order to help with that, but we are far from this point. I mean, just an idea.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I want to actually thank you in general for I think I think that most of us don't know what questions to ask as we've heard this now. But I think that's a good start, because when we're faced with these questions, which it's not really sure what we want to do with it, we've been given a conceptual framework which will help us think about how it is that we deal with the questions, not only in experiments such as controlled experiments that you explained, but also in the classroom, which is a totally different sort of situation. Are there other questions? It's getting Dan. Yes, we've had a question. How does all of this influence decision making? Are emotions a way of balancing incongruencies, or perhaps as when intended outcomes do not match expectations?
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So with respect to emotions, this is an area that we studied, but I didn't talk about it much. It is usually the case that, many people think that emotion, as I said before, I think, have privileged access to higher cortical structures or to higher cognitive apparatus. And it looks as if people, we show in several experiments, which I didn't describe, that there's top-down modulation of emotion. The reason why people think that emotion may be completely automatic and very hard to be regulated is because the structures, the brain structures involved in emotion are low structures, like the amygdala and other subcortical structures, and this is how it is described, that they have privileged access to higher brain structures, higher cognitive apparatus, and this is why they cannot be regulated. However, it seems that they can be regulated. It seems that regulation is partly person-specific, or the individual differences in this. We found recently that people who can use reappraisal, I'll describe it in a minute, are better at regulating their emotions. What is reappraisal? For example, if you're confronted with a negative stimulus or negative emotion or something that generates negative emotion, there are various ways to deal with this. One way is not to think about it or to be distracted, distract yourself or move to another thing. Another way is to reappraise the situation, that is, to find out what the alternatives are. Maybe this is not so negative. Maybe there's another way to deal with it. So I'm not going to get extremely high grade and be frustrated, or if I do get this extreme very low grade, then maybe I can do X or Y in order to deal with it, or in order to choose or select another way of dealing with the situation, and so on. Apparently, people who are good at reappraisal can deal or regulate emotions better, or can modulate emotion by top-down processing better than others, or at least the emotions or the situation that we confronted them with. It may be the case, we are now working on it, that there might be ways to train people in reappraisal or in other ways of dealing with emotion. If we find a way to do it, then training may be a solution in order to show people how to deal with their emotion, or to train people to deal with their emotions. Actually, cognitive brain therapy is based, in a sense, on, or cognitive therapy, sorry, not cognitive brain therapy, is based on similar ideas. That is, that you can change people's view or teach them how to deal with things in order to be better at dealing with or modulating various aspects of behavior. Some of the emotions, and other might be even selective attention.
Thank you very, very much. It's been a long evening. I think we learned a great deal. Thank you very much, Professor Henig. I'm inviting people to applaud, which some people who know where to do it are doing so, and thank you very much. I would like to ask all of you from overseas, and those of you who are registered for some sort of gmul, to write your email in the chat so that we can have it with us. And if you'll give me 3 minutes just for 2 or 3 short announcements, I'll do that before I say goodnight to you all. So I would like you to know that we do have webinars of this sort about once every month, both in Hebrew and in English. And so that you'll know, we also have a study tour coming up in March, which people are invited from overseas to join. Please see that if you'll write to international@makam.cil, you'll be able to do that, and also join our academy. That's more than been invited to do so. And for those of you with Hebrew, we have coming up in another 3 weeks a session about mobile technology, which we'd like to have you join. And if you'll give me just 1 more minute, those of us from our entire team who are here and those who aren't here this evening want to thank you very, very much for joining us. Again, to Abishi Henig, we thank you very much for what you've done. I trust that we'll be still getting questions which people will send on to us, and we'll forward them to you. To the Raya has asked that I show the webinars in English. If you'll go into that, but you know what? Now that we have, Raya, your mail, we will see to it that we'll send you a list, so that we will be able to do that in that way. And it's getting late, so if you'll permit me, I'm going to say good night to all of you. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and we hope to be in contact with you all in the near future. And we're sorry that someone has just joined us right now. Isn't that strange? Thank you for joining us at the very, very end. So, okay. Good night to you all, and we will be in contact.
Thank you. Bye.